The Bible gives more chapters to this single structure than it gives to the creation of the entire universe. It weighed over 6 metric tons. It cost more gold than most royal treasuries of its age, and it could be completely dismantled and loaded onto 6 wagons in a single morning. The question is not whether the tabernacle was real. The question is, what was it actually built to contain? For 430 years, Israel had lived inside the greatest building culture on earth. Egypt in the second millennium BCE was not simply a powerful empire, it was a civilization that had turned stone into theology. The temples of Karnak stretched for 2 kilometers along the east bank of the Nile, a succession of pylons, hypostyle halls, and inner sanctuaries that took more than 2,000 years to complete and still stand today as the largest religious complex ever built on Earth. The pylons of Ramesses II at Luxor rose 40 meters above the floodplain, carved with battle scenes so enormous that you could see them from across the river. The inner sanctuaries of Egypt's gods held colossal divine statues carved from granite and quartzite, their surfaces covered in gold leaf, their eyes inlaid with semi-precious stones, their presence maintained daily by a priestly caste that numbered in the thousands. Every Egyptian knew what the house of a god looked like. It was stone. It was permanent. It was so massive that time itself seemed unable to touch it. The Egyptians were not building structures to last a generation. They were building for eternity, and they knew how to do it. Israel knew this world from the inside, not as tourists or as diplomats, but as laborers. The biblical record identifies the Israelites as builders of the store cities of Pithom and Ramesses. Both cities have been investigated archaeologically. The city of Ramesses, now identified with the site of Pi Ramesses at Qantir in the eastern Nile Delta, was one of the largest urban centres of the ancient world during the reign of Ramesses II in the 13th century BCE. Excavations there have uncovered the remains of massive administrative buildings, stabling for hundreds of horses, military installations, and workshops producing weaponry and luxury goods on an industrial scale. The city covered at least 10 square kilometres. Its population has been estimated in the tens of thousands. It required continuous large-scale labour to build and maintain. State-organised workforce systems, including the use of Asiatic labourers for brick production, are documented in both the textual and archaeological record of this period. The Corvée labour gang working alongside Israelite brickmakers appears in Egyptian papyri. This was not a myth. This was a documented system, and Israel had lived inside that system for generations. They knew what it meant to quarry stone, to lay foundations, to plaster walls, to transport materials across long distances, to work under the supervision of Egyptian overseers with production quotas written on papyrus. Their hands and backs carried the physical knowledge of monumental construction. They understood scale, logistics, and the relationship between labour and sacred architecture in a way that could only come from generations of first-hand experience. Then the Exodus happened, and when Israel arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai, having crossed the sea and travelled through the desert, they arrived as a people with extraordinary architectural knowledge and absolutely no architectural identity of their own. They had never built a sacred structure. They had no established priesthood, no temple tradition, no liturgical system, no sacred furniture, no canonical form of worship. The God of their ancestors, the God who had spoken to Abraham in Canaan, to Isaac in the Negev, to Jacob at Bethel, had no house, no address, no physical representation, no image, no statue. He had spoken from a burning bush. He had led them as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, but he had no dwelling. This gap between the immense theological gravity of what they had just experienced and the complete absence of any institutional religious infrastructure was not going to remain unfilled. And the way God chose to fill it is one of the most surprising architectural stories in the ancient world. The instructions begin in Exodus chapter 25. But before the first measurement is given, before the first material is specified, there is a statement of purpose that changes everything that follows. God tells Moses, "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst." The word translated sanctuary is mikdash, a holy place. But the word translated dwell is the root sheken, to settle, to take up residence, to encamp among. And from this root comes the word that gives the whole structure its name, mishkan, the dwelling place, the tabernacle. This is not the vocabulary of a king commanding the construction of a monument. This is the vocabulary of a nomad who wants to camp among his people. The creator of the universe was asking for a tent. The scope of what follows in the text is almost impossible to convey without a direct comparison. The account of creation in Genesis covers 6 days of cosmic activity in 2 chapters, running to approximately 2,000 words. The instructions for the tabernacle occupy 13 chapters of Exodus and exceed 10,000 words of detailed text. God, by any measure of textual proportion, had more to say about the specification of curtain clasps and the dimensions of planks than about the formation of stars and seas. And this asymmetry is not an accident of editorial history or a curiosity of ancient literary priority. It reflects a deliberate theological choice, that this structure was important enough to warrant exhaustive documentation, and that the documentation itself carried meaning. Read through those 13 chapters and the density is extraordinary. Exodus 25 specifies the materials to be gathered: gold, silver, bronze, blue thread, purple thread, scarlet thread, fine twisted linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, a specific outer covering material, acacia wood, olive oil for the lamps, spices for the anointing oil, spices for the incense, onyx stones, and stones for the ephod and breastpiece. The list covers items that require long-distance trade networks, skilled textile production, advanced metallurgy, and access to animals from desert and sea. From a people who had just left slavery with whatever they could carry, the expectation seems impossible on its face. Then come the dimensions. The Ark of the Covenant is specified to the half cubit. The table of showbread is specified to the half cubit. The menorah is described with enough detail about its branches, cups, calyxes, and blossoms that scholars have spent centuries arguing about its precise form. The frames of the tabernacle structure are given exact measurements: 10 cubits tall, 1.5 cubits wide, with 2 tenons each. The crossbars are described: 5 per side, with the middle crossbar running the full length of each wall. The outer curtains of the courtyard, their heights, their lengths, their hanging systems, the number of pillars and the spacing between them, all of it recorded. And then come the craftsmen. The lead artisan of the entire project was named Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, from the tribe of Judah. The text describes him as someone filled with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, in carving wood, to work in every craft. His colleague, Oholiab, from the tribe of Dan, was described as skilled in design, embroidery, and weaving in blue, purple, and scarlet thread and fine twisted linen. These were not priests. They were master craftsmen, and this is a detail scholars of the ancient Near East have found genuinely significant. In Egyptian temple construction, the craftsmen were often temple affiliated, working under priestly supervision, in their skills considered gifts of the divine patron deity of their workshop. The biblical narrative picks up this same theme directly. Bezalel's skills are framed not as natural talent or Egyptian training, but as divine endowment. He was specifically equipped by God to build the structure God was designing. The tabernacle required not just royal command, but divine artisanship. Scholars examining the tabernacle instructions against the broader record of ancient religious building texts have noted something that sets these texts apart. Most ancient accounts of temple construction are commemorative. A king builds a temple, and the inscription records his piety, his divine mandate, his generosity, and the splendor of what he produced. The language is impressionistic, glorious, magnificent, like the stars of heaven, worthy of the God's majesty. The tabernacle texts are not commemorative, they are prescriptive. They tell you not just that something was built, but exactly how to build it. They function more like a technical specification than a royal inscription, and this means they were designed to be replicable. The instructions assumed a future builder who needed to know, not just to admire. The tabernacle was a portable and reproducible sacred technology from the first word of its description. Before a single plank was cut, or a single curtain was hemmed, there was the question of materials. And this is where the account becomes genuinely extraordinary. The tabernacle was built in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula by a recently liberated slave population. They had no mines, no quarries, no royal treasury, no functioning trade network. They were living on manna in a desert. The materials list demanded gold, silver, bronze, fine linen, goat hair, ram skins, an exotic outer covering, acacia wood, olive oil, spices, and multiple varieties of precious stones. The question of where any of this came from might seem to end the entire project before it begins. The answer is in Exodus chapter 12, in a passage that is often read too quickly. On the night of the Passover, as Israel prepared to leave Egypt, the text records that the Israelites asked their Egyptian neighbours for silver jewellery, gold jewellery, and clothing, and the Egyptians gave it to them. The Hebrew word used describes a voluntary giving under pressure, motivated partly by the devastating plagues that had fallen on Egypt and partly by the enormous social disruption of an entire workforce preparing to leave overnight. Whatever the precise historical dynamics, the Israelites left Egypt carrying portable wealth that had been transferred from Egyptian households to theirs in a single night. The text frames this explicitly as the fulfillment of a promise God had made to Abraham centuries earlier, that when his descendants left their slavery, they would go out with great possessions. Now convert this to concrete terms. The total gold donated for the tabernacle was recorded precisely, 29 talents and 730 shekels. In the Hebrew system of weights, a talent represented the maximum load a single person could carry, standardized at approximately 34 kilograms or 75 pounds. 29 talents of gold equals approximately 987 kilograms. In modern terms, that is nearly 1 metric ton of gold. At the spot price of gold as of early 2026, and 1 metric ton of gold would be worth approximately $93 million. This quantity of gold was donated voluntarily by a population of former slaves in the Sinai desert. The silver recorded for the tabernacle was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels. Using the same weight calculation, that is approximately 3,400 kilograms of silver, more than 3 metric tons. This silver came from a specific source, the census of Israel. Every adult male who was counted paid a half shekel of silver as a ransom payment. The silver from the census funded the silver bases that held the tabernacle's structural frames upright, 100 bases in total, each base weighing exactly 1 talent of silver. The structural foundation of the most sacred space on earth was built from the individual ransom payments of every counted man in Israel. The architecture was personal. The bronze total was 70 talents and 2,400 shekels, approximately 2,400 kilograms. This material came from the donations of the general population and was used for the utilitarian elements: the courtyard pillars, the bronze altar, the bronze laver, the hooks, the pegs, and the bases. The total metal weight alone exceeded 6 metric tons. Add the acacia wood for 48 structural frames, plus their crossbars, the fabric for multiple layers of curtains and coverings, totaling thousands of square feet, the animal skins, the oil, the spices, and the precious stones, and you are looking at a construction project that would be substantial by any measure in any era. That it was assembled in the Sinai by a mobile population is the first of the story's genuinely astonishing logistics. But the most remarkable detail in the entire material account is the one most easily overlooked. The text records in Exodus 36 that the craftsmen working on the tabernacle came to Moses with a report. The people are bringing more than enough. The exact words are that the material is more than sufficient for the service of the work that the Lord has commanded us to make. Moses then issued an announcement through the camp that stopped the donations. People were restrained from bringing more. In the middle of a desert, recently freed slaves had to be told to stop giving gold for a sacred building project. It is one of the most economically counterintuitive moments in the entire biblical record, and it says something significant about the emotional and communal investment that the people had in this structure. Every person who donated a piece of jewelry, a skin, or a spool of thread became personally connected to the construction of God's dwelling place. The tabernacle was not built for the people by a king, it was built by the people for God. The measurements of the tabernacle are precise, and they reward close examination, because embedded within the numbers is a spatial logic that tells you exactly what this structure was communicating about its own theology. Begin at the outermost boundary and move inward. The courtyard enclosure measured 100 cubits long by 50 cubits wide. Using the standard Hebrew cubit of approximately 18 inches or 45 centimeters, the outer courtyard measured roughly 150 feet by 75 feet. Picture a space approximately half the size of an American football field, are enclosed by fine linen curtains hanging on 60 bronze pillars, with a single entrance on the eastern side facing the sunrise. The courtyard was not small. It was large enough to accommodate significant gatherings and large-scale ritual activity. Inside this courtyard, occupying the western third, sat the tabernacle structure itself. Its dimensions were 30 cubits long, 10 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high, approximately 45 feet by 15 feet by 15 feet. For a modern comparison, a standard 40-foot shipping container is approximately 40 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 8.5 feet high. The interior of the tabernacle was only slightly larger than a single shipping container, yet it was made of beaten gold-covered acacia wood frames and hung with embroidered linen and 4 layers of textile roofing. Its material density, symbolic loading, and sacred restriction were extraordinary. Size, it turns out, was not the point. The interior of the tabernacle structure was divided by the Great Veil into 2 rooms. The outer room, called the Holy Place, measured 20 cubits long, 10 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high, a rectangular space approximately 30 feet by 15 feet by 15 feet. The inner room, called the Most Holy Place, or the Debir, measured 10 cubits in every direction, length, width, and height. It was a perfect cube, approximately 15 feet on each side. Now hold that ratio in mind. The Holy Place was 20 cubits long. The Most Holy Place was 10 cubits long. The ratio was exactly 2:1. 400 years later, when Solomon constructed the permanent temple in Jerusalem, he used precisely the same spatial proportion at exactly double the scale. And the holy place in Solomon's temple was 40 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The most holy place was 20 cubits in every direction, another perfect cube, twice the size of the tabernacle's inner room, but maintaining the same 2-to-1 proportional relationship to the holy place. The ratio established in the desert tent was preserved, scaled, and executed in stone. Solomon did not redesign the sacred architecture of Israel. He translated it. This proportional continuity is one of the strongest arguments that the tabernacle descriptions preserve authentic architectural information and not later inventions. When Ezekiel, writing during the Babylonian exile, receives a visionary blueprint for an idealized future temple in chapters 40 through 48, the same spatial logic appears again, scaled differently but following the same hierarchical zoning principles. The tabernacle established a canon of sacred proportion that persisted across 1,000 years of Israelite architectural thinking. Consider also the height, 10 cubits, approximately 15 feet. Modern residential building standards require 8-foot ceilings. The interior of the tabernacle was nearly twice that, and this was not a stone building where height came free with the walls. The tabernacle's height was achieved through careful frame engineering, 48 upright acacia planks, each 10 cubits tall and 1.5 cubits wide, mortised into double silver bases, held in position by 5 horizontal crossbars running through gold rings attached to each frame. The entire frame system was a wood and metal structure that had to be engineered to stand upright without permanent anchoring to a foundation, stable enough to support the weight of multiple layers of heavy textile roofing, and designed to be disassembled and reassembled repeatedly without damage. The engineering problem this posed to craftsmen working with hand tools and no modern fasteners was considerable. Scholars have estimated the weight of the acacia wood frames alone at several tons. Add the gold overlay on each frame, the silver bases, the crossbars, and the gold rings, and the structural assembly weighed enough that Numbers 7 records that the Levitical families responsible for transporting the tabernacle were given wagons and oxen specifically for the task. 2 wagons and 4 oxen went to the Gershonites, who carried the curtains and coverings. 4 wagons and 8 oxen went to the Merarites, who carried the frames, bases, pillars, and hardware. The Kohathites, who carried the sacred furnishings, received no wagons. They carried everything on their own shoulders on carrying poles. The hierarchy of transport reflected the hierarchy of holiness. The more sacred the object, the more directly human it required human bodies to carry it. Now look upward. Because the roof of the tabernacle is one of the most carefully engineered and most consistently overlooked aspects of the entire structure. And when you understand how it worked, your respect for the craftsman who built it changes entirely. The tabernacle did not have one roof. It had 4 distinct layers, each made from different materials, each serving a different function, and each fitted over the one beneath it in a deliberately sequenced system. This is not a case of folk tradition accumulating layers over time. The text specifies all 4 layers simultaneously, in order as part of a single unified design brief. The innermost layer was made of fine twisted linen in white, with cherubim figures embroidered in blue, purple, and scarlet thread. Exodus 26 describes 10 panels of this fabric, each 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. The panels were joined in pairs by means of loops and clasps, and then joined into 2 large sheets connected along their length by 50 gold clasps. The total textile surface this produced was enormous. Stretched across the top and down the interior sides of the tabernacle frame, it formed the ceiling and walls that the priests saw when they worked inside the holy place. It was the interior decorative layer, sacred art executed in thread. The embroidered cherubim meant that the entire interior of the structure appeared to be surrounded by angelic throne guardians on every surface. Standing inside and looking up, a priest would see not plain fabric, but a sky of woven celestial beings. The second layer, which covered the linen completely from outside, was made of goat hair. 11 panels, each 30 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, joined by loops and bronze clasps into 2 large sheets. Goat hair is one of the most time-tested tent-making materials in human history. Bedouin nomads have woven their tents from black goat hair for at least 4,000 years, and the tradition continues in parts of the Middle East today. Goat hair is naturally weather-resistant, insulating in cold and warm conditions, and highly durable under repeated assembly and disassembly. The goat hair covering was the tabernacle's weatherproofing envelope, the layer that turned an aesthetic structure into a functional one. The third layer was made of ram skins dyed red. This is the element of the roofing system that scholars discuss least, perhaps because so little is said about it. But its position in the sequence tells us its function. Placed over the goat hair and beneath the outermost covering, it served as a moisture barrier, preventing condensation or penetrating water from soaking through the goat hair into the linen interior. Dyed leather had been used for waterproofing in the ancient Near East for thousands of years. The red dyeing process itself used tannins that enhanced the leather's water resistance. This was not decorative. It was functional weatherproofing at the interface between the fibrous and the outer layers. The fourth and outermost layer is the most debated element of the tabernacle's material description. The Hebrew word is tachash, and it has generated more scholarly argument per letter than almost any other term in the construction texts. The King James Version translated it as badgers' skins, a rendering that has amused zoologists for centuries since badgers are neither aquatic nor particularly abundant in the Sinai. Most modern translations use dugong, porpoise, or sea cow. Some scholars have proposed the tachash was a specific type of dolphin or seal from the Red Sea. Others have suggested it was an exotic leather traded through ancient Near Eastern trade networks, perhaps from the leather of the large marine mammals that inhabited the Red Sea coast east of the Sinai Peninsula. What is not in dispute is this: the outermost covering of the tabernacle was made from the skin of a large aquatic or semi-aquatic mammal, prized specifically for its durability, its water resistance, and probably its exotic appearance. It was the final defense against the harsh desert environment, resistant to sun, wind, sand, and rain. If you were standing outside the tabernacle looking at it, you would see the somewhat rough, naturally grey-brown surface of this outer covering, functional, protective, and completely at odds with the breathtaking beauty hidden just inside. 4 layers. From outside in, exotic marine mammal leather, red-dyed ram skin, goat hair, embroidered linen, weather defense, moisture barrier, insulation and weatherproofing, sacred interior. The system functions on the same architectural principle as modern layered roofing membranes for high-performance outdoor structures, each layer performing a specific task, none replicating the others. The tabernacle's roof was the product of genuine engineering intelligence, executed in natural materials, designed for extreme portability and long-term function. Whoever designed this understood desert environments, textile behavior under heat and moisture stress, and the engineering requirements of a structure that had to survive years or decades of wilderness use. Inside the tabernacle, 5 pieces of furniture defined its function. They were not decoration. Each one was a theological instrument, and together they created a physical map of the relationship between Israel and God, a map organized as a journey from the outside in. Begin at the courtyard entrance on the eastern side, standing in the early morning light facing the tabernacle. The first object you would encounter, dominating the central space of the courtyard, was the bronze altar. It measured 5 cubits square and 3 cubits high, approximately 7.5 feet on each side and 4.5 feet tall. Made of acacia wood completely overlaid with bronze, with 4 bronze horns projecting from its corners and a grate of bronze mesh inside to hold the fire, It was the largest and most physically imposing object in the entire tabernacle complex. Everything that entered the presence of God had to pass by the altar first. Every morning and evening sacrifice, every sin offering, every guilt offering, every voluntary burnt offering, all of it came to this place. The altar was not one element among many, it was the threshold. The horns at the altar's corners carried specific significance. In biblical legal and priestly tradition, a person who fled to the altar and grasped its horns was claiming sanctuary. The physical act of touching the horns of the altar placed a person under the protection of the divine presence associated with that space. Blood from the sacrifices was applied to these horns as part of the purification ritual. The horns were the altar's most active contact points with the divine human transaction that happened at this place every day. Behind the bronze altar, positioned between the altar and the entrance to the tabernacle structure, stood the bronze laver. This was a large basin of bronze filled with water, used by the priests to wash their hands and feet before entering the tabernacle and before approaching the altar to serve. The text in Exodus 30 records that failure to wash before approaching the sacred space was a capital offense. Impurity and sacred space could not coexist. What makes the laver's construction remarkable is the source of its metal. Exodus 38:8 records that the bronze laver was made from the bronze mirrors donated by the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. In the ancient world, a polished bronze mirror was one of the most personal and valued objects a woman could own. It was not a luxury item in the modern sense. It was a functional necessity, an object of daily self-knowledge. To give it away was to give away something intimate. The transformation of women's mirrors into a basin of purification was a theological statement built into the object's metallurgy. Personal vanity converted into communal holiness. Now enter the tabernacle structure through its entrance screen on the east end and stand in the holy place. Your eyes adjust to the interior light. The only light source in this room is to your left, to the south, the golden menorah. The menorah was made of beaten pure gold, not gold-covered wood, not cast gold. Beaten from a single talent of pure gold into a complete form. A central shaft rising from its base, with 3 branches extending from each side, each branch terminating in a cup shaped like an almond flower with its calyx. 7 cups total, each holding a lamp of pure olive oil, burning continuously. The text specifies that the artisan was to beat the menorah from one piece. No welds, no attachments, no seam anywhere in its structure. A single talent of gold, approximately 34 kilograms, hammered into a branching, flowering lampstand. The metalworking skill required to achieve this without modern precision tools defies easy description. It would have been among the most demanding pieces of metalwork produced in the ancient Near East during that period. The menorah burned continuously. The priests tended it daily, trimming the wicks, replenishing the oil, ensuring that the light never went out. In the windowless interior of the tabernacle, the menorah was the sole source of light. Everything in the holy place, the embroidered cherubim on the ceiling, the gold-covered furniture, the gold-covered walls, was visible only by the light of these 7 flames. The visual effect in that enclosed gold surface space would have been overwhelming. To the north of the holy place, directly across from the menorah, stood the table of showbread. Made of acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, measuring 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high, with a moulding of gold around its rim and a frame below. On this table, 12 loaves of bread were arranged in 2 rows of 6, renewed every Sabbath. The old loaves, removed after a week in the divine presence, were eaten only by the priests, only inside the sacred precinct, only as holy food. The 12 loaves represented the 12 tribes of Israel, their weekly bread laid out before God as a continuous symbol of his provision for and relationship with every tribe. It was a dining table set for a king who did not eat in the ordinary sense, but whose guests, the priestly mediators, consumed what had rested in his presence. At the centre of the holy place, directly in front of the veil, stood the altar of incense. It was small by the standards of the bronze altar, 1 cubit square and 2 cubits high, acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, with 4 gold horns at its corners. Twice daily, at the morning and evening service, the officiating priest burned incense on this altar. The specific formula for the tabernacle incense is recorded in Exodus 30. Stacte, onycha, galbanum, and pure frankincense in equal parts, salted and processed into a fine powder. This formula was absolutely restricted. Making it for any purpose other than the tabernacle service was a capital offence. The scent of God's house was legally unique. There was no other place on earth where that precise combination of aromas was permitted to exist. The smoke from the incense altar rose toward the veil, toward the most holy place, and the association between incense smoke and divine presence, between rising fragrant cloud and the approach of God, is one of the oldest and most persistent elements of ancient Near Eastern religious practice. In the tabernacle, it was architecturally embodied. The altar positioned at the threshold of the forbidden room, its smoke continuously rising toward the divine presence just beyond the curtain. The tabernacle did not stand in isolation. It was the center of an entire mobile city, and the organization of that city reveals something profound about how ancient Israel understood the relationship between human social structure and divine presence. Numbers chapter 2 records the arrangement of the Israelite camp in the wilderness with remarkable precision. The 12 tribes were divided into 4 groups of 3, each group assigned a compass direction and a leading tribe whose standard gave the group its name. To the east, facing the sunrise, and positioned at the tabernacle's entrance, camped Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. To the south camped Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. To the west camped Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. To the north camped Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Between the tribes and the tabernacle, forming a buffer ring, camped the 3 clans of the Levites, the Gershonites to the west, the Merarites to the north, and the Kohathites to the south. Moses and Aaron camped before the entrance on the east. This arrangement, as a geometric form, is a set of concentric rings, the tabernacle at the center, the Levites in the inner ring, the 12 tribes in the 4-directional outer arrangement. When scholars attempt to map these formations onto actual terrain, accounting for the biblical census numbers, the implications are enormous. The census records 603,550 fighting men over 20 years of age, including women, children under 20, and the uncounted Levites. Population estimates range from 1 to 3 million people. Even at the most conservative modern reinterpretations of the census data, the total community was in the hundreds of thousands. A formation of that size, arranged in 4 directional groupings around a central point, it would have extended for miles in every direction. Standing on a high point and looking down at the camp, you would have seen a human geography oriented entirely around a single tent at its center. This is not simply a religious arrangement. Scholars of the ancient Near East have identified a striking parallel in Egyptian military camp organization. The great battle reliefs of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel and Luxor, depicting the Kadesh campaign of approximately 1274 BCE, include detailed representations of the Egyptian military camp formation. In those reliefs, the royal tent of Ramesses is positioned at the center of a rectangular camp enclosure. His household guard forms an inner ring around the tent. The 4 military divisions of the army are arrayed around the perimeter in the 4 compass directions. The entire military formation radiates outward from the king's tent as its organizing center. The parallel to Israel's wilderness camp is direct and deliberate. Israel's camp followed the same logic as the Pharaoh's battle camp, with one categorical difference. The king at the center was not human. The tabernacle was God's field headquarters in the wilderness campaign. The camp of Israel was not organized as a civilian settlement. It was organized as a military formation around the throne of the divine commander. The 12 tribes were not just camped near the tabernacle for convenience. They were deployed around it as a military force around its command center. The cloud and fire that accompanied the tabernacle were, in this context, the divine commander's signal standard. Numbers 9 records the operational rule with complete clarity. When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the entire camp broke, packed, and moved in the direction of travel. When the cloud settled on the tabernacle, the camp formed around it and stayed. The pace and direction of the wilderness journey were not determined by geography, available water, or tribal consensus. They were determined by the position of God's cloud over God's tent. Israel moved when God moved. Israel stopped when God stopped. The tabernacle was the operational nerve center of the entire 40-year wilderness campaign. Of all the tabernacle's physical elements, the veil is perhaps the most theologically concentrated. Every measurement, every material, in every restriction associated with it communicates something about the nature of the God for whom this structure was built. The veil separated the holy place from the most holy place. It hung on 4 pillars of acacia wood overlaid with gold, set into 4 bases of silver, positioned 10 cubits from the western end of the tabernacle structure. The veil itself was made of blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and fine twisted linen woven with the figures of cherubim. It was not a curtain in the ordinary sense. A modern reader might imagine a heavy drape. The veil was a woven textile construction of extraordinary richness and technical complexity. 3 colors of expensive dyed thread combined with high-quality linen into a fabric that incorporated 3-dimensional cherubim figures into its structure through skilled weaving. The colors carried immediate cultural meaning to anyone in the ancient Near East. Blue thread in this period was produced from the secretion of the Murex trunculus, or the Murex brandaris snail, and the extraction process was laborious and expensive. Producing a small amount of blue dye required the collection and processing of thousands of snails, which is why blue textiles in the ancient world were associated with wealth and royal status. Purple was even rarer and more costly, produced from a related but distinct species of Murex snail in a process that required a different chemical reduction. Purple was the color of royalty in a way that was not metaphorical in the ancient world. It was practically royalty-coded into every thread. Scarlet came from the kermes or coccus insect, crushed and boiled to produce a vivid red dye that was itself expensive and labor-intensive to produce. A textile combining all 3 of these colors was not just beautiful. It was a statement of royal wealth and authority that any ancient observer would have read instantly as belonging to the realm of kings and gods. The cherubim woven into the veil connected it directly to the objects on the other side. The mercy seat in the most holy place was flanked by 2 golden cherubim. The veil between the 2 rooms was woven with cherubim. The visual language of the entire system was consistent. From the outer courtyard inward, the viewer was approaching a space defined by the presence of angelic throne guardians, moving through a series of thresholds that were progressively more restricted, in toward a point where the divine presence was most concentrated, and the restrictions on that approach were absolute. Every Israelite, priest or non-priest, could enter the outer courtyard for the public aspects of worship. The holy place was accessible to priests alone, as part of their ongoing daily service. The most holy place was accessible to exactly one person, the high priest, and he could enter it on exactly 1 day per year, the Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month, the annual fast when Israel's accumulated sins were confessed and ritually carried away. The high priest's preparation for this entry was itself a multi-day process of purification. Leviticus 16 records that when he finally entered the most holy place, he was required to bring a cloud of incense smoke with him, in so that the smoke covered the mercy seat and he did not die. The direct, unmediated view of the mercy seat, the throne of God, was considered lethal to an unprepared human being. The spatial theology of the tabernacle was therefore explicit and architecturally enforced. Holiness was not a diffuse or equal quality spread across space. It was concentrated at a specific point, and the closer you moved toward that point, the more severe the restrictions on your access. The outer courtyard, the holy place, the most holy place. Each threshold crossed required greater qualifications, greater preparation, and greater danger. The architecture of the tabernacle was a physical argument about the nature of holiness and the terms on which finite human beings could approach an infinite God. We have arrived at the center. Every measurement and every material, every layer of restriction has been pointing here, to the most holy place and to the object inside it. The room itself was a perfect cube, 10 cubits in every direction, approximately 15 feet of length, width, and height. In later traditions, the perfect cube carried specific associations of divine completeness, of a space that had been made equal and balanced in every dimension, free from the hierarchical distinctions of front and back, top and bottom that characterize ordinary space. When Ezekiel described his visionary Holy of Holies, it was cubic. When the book of Revelation described the New Jerusalem at the end of time, it was a perfect cube of immense scale, 12,000 stadia on each side. The cube was the architectural language of divine perfection, and the most holy place spoke that language exactly. Inside the cube, a single object, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark measured 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high, approximately 45 inches by 27 inches by 27 inches. It was made of acacia wood, overlaid entirely with pure gold, inside and out, with a gold moulding running around its top rim. 4 gold rings, one at each corner, held 2 carrying poles of acacia wood overlaid with gold. The poles were designed to remain permanently in the rings. They were never removed. The ark was always ready to be carried. The lid of the ark, called the caporeth, was a solid slab of pure gold of the same length and width as the ark itself. Most English translations render this as the mercy seat. The Hebrew root kafar carries the meaning of covering or atonement, and it is the same root used for Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. The caporeth was not simply a lid. It was the place where atonement happened, the physical surface where the high priest sprinkled blood on the Day of Atonement as the culminating act of Israel's annual reconciliation with God. On the caporeth, a craftsman had fashioned 2 golden cherubim. They were beaten from gold as part of the same single piece as the mercy seat, not attached separately, but formed from the same piece of gold. They faced each other. They looked downward toward the mercy seat, and their wings extended upward and then bent inward, arching over the space between them, the wings of one touching the wings of the other at the top, creating an enclosing canopy above the empty space between them. It is this space, the empty space between the 2 cherubim directly above the mercy seat, that the text identifies as the throne of God. 1 Samuel 4:4 refers to the Lord, who is enthroned on the cherubim. Psalms 80:99 and Isaiah 37 use identical language. The cherubim were throne guardians, identical in function to the paired-winged divine beings that flank the thrones of rulers in ancient Near Eastern royal art from Egypt to Assyria to Canaan. Carved ivory panels from Megiddo, dating to approximately the 12th century BCE, show a king seated on a cherub-flanked throne. Winged sphinxes supporting royal thrones appear in Phoenician and Canaanite contexts throughout the first millennium BCE. The ancient viewer would have recognized the iconographic language of the Ark of the Covenant immediately. This was a throne, and the throne was empty. Here is where the tabernacle makes its most radical architectural statement. In every other sacred space in the ancient world, the innermost room contained a divine image. Egyptian inner sanctuaries held the divine cult statue that was the physical body of the god, bathed, dressed, anointed, and fed daily by the priests. Babylonian temples housed divine statues in similar systems of care. Canaanite high places and shrines held carved images, standing stones, and representations of the divine. Every culture surrounding Israel said, through its sacred architecture, "The God is here, and here is what the God looks like." The most holy place of the tabernacle said, "The God of Israel is present here, and he cannot be seen. He has no form. He occupies no image. He is enthroned above the mercy seat between the cherubim, and you will not see him with your eyes." The empty throne was not a gap in the design waiting to be filled. It was the design. The absence of an image was the theological statement. God was not reducible to any physical form, not capturable in any material, not containable in any medium. You could specify his address, you could not depict his face, and yet the ark was not entirely empty either. Inside it rested the 2 stone tablets of the law, the covenant document given at Sinai, the 10 words that defined Israel's relationship to God. Some traditions recorded that Aaron's rod, which had budded in the wilderness as a sign of divine selection, and a jar of manna, the daily food of the wilderness, were also kept inside or beside the ark. The ark did not hold an image of God. It held the words of God. The covenant document was Israel's closest physical representation of divine communication. This is the discovery that the entire investigation has been building toward. The tabernacle was not a simpler version of an Egyptian temple. It was not a nomadic approximation of what Israel wished it could build in stone. It was a deliberate, sophisticated, theologically articulate architectural argument against the image theology of every surrounding culture. Its empty throne, its invisible presence, its word-bearing box, its perfectly cubic room were not limitations of desert construction. They were the point. The God who occupied this space was making an argument about himself, that he was not like the gods of Egypt or Canaan or Babylon, not representable, not containable, not visible, but genuinely present, genuinely dwelling, in genuinely meeting with his people in this specific place through a covenant written on stone and kept in a golden box under an empty throne in the center of a tent in the wilderness. The entire structure, with its 6 metric tons of donated metal, its 4-layer roof system, its graded zones of holiness, its furniture designed as a theology of approach, was built to house an absence that was also a presence. That paradox is not a weakness in the design, it is the design's highest achievement. What do we make of all of this? The tabernacle was Israel's first sacred space, and it established patterns that would persist for over 1,000 years. Solomon's temple doubled its proportions and translated its logic into permanent stone. The Second Temple, rebuilt after the Babylonian exile, preserved the same spatial grammar of graduated holiness. Herod's renovation in the 1st century BCE expanded the complex to breathtaking scale while maintaining the same progression from outer courts inward to the Holy of Holies. The spatial argument of a desert tent, with its concentric zones of increasing holiness, organized around a single point of divine presence, endured through 7 centuries of Israelite and Jewish history, and left its mark on every subsequent iteration of sacred architecture in that tradition. The tabernacle's conceptual legacy reached further still. The New Testament writers drew on tabernacle imagery extensively when they tried to articulate their experience of a new kind of divine presence. The book of Hebrews describes the earthly tabernacle as a shadow, a physical copy of a heavenly reality that it was always pointing toward. The Gospel of John, writing in Greek about the Word becoming flesh, chose the word skenu to describe that dwelling, to pitch a tent. The resonance with Mishkan is unmistakable. The New Jerusalem of Revelation is cubic. The language of divine dwelling, of God choosing to tabernacle among his people, flows directly from the wilderness structure back through the prophets and forward through the apostles. And then there is what the tabernacle cost in human terms, not just gold and silver and bronze, though it cost all of those in staggering quantities for a people who had nothing. What it cost was attention. 13 chapters of divine specification, the calling and equipping of master craftsmen, the voluntary giving of personal treasures, the organizing of an entire nation's camp around a central tent, the daily service of an entire priestly tribe, the annual drama of a single man entering a forbidden room on behalf of everyone else. The tabernacle was expensive in the way that the things people most deeply value are always expensive, in time, in care, in the concentration of human skill and devotion on a single project that mattered more than anything else. 3,000 years later, archaeologists still debate its construction details. Architects still analyze its proportional system. Theologians still write about its spatial theology. The tent has been gone for millennia. The argument it made still draws people in. God did not ask for a mountain or a palace or a monument that would outlast the civilizations around it. He asked for a tent that his people could carry with them, made from the gold they had just brought out of captivity, built by craftsmen he had specifically equipped for the task. And in that tent, between two cherubim, above an empty mercy seat, behind a veil of royal colours, in a cube of perfect proportion, the most architecturally sophisticated theological argument in the ancient world was made without a single word. What does it mean to build a dwelling for something that cannot be contained? If this investigation has changed how you see the tabernacle, drop a comment below. We would love to know what struck you most. And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden architecture of the biblical world, make sure you are subscribed because there is much more still to find.